Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Educatedcollins Snap channel. How you doing? So today we're going to be doing something a little bit different. We're going to do a full deck breakdown. So this is the first of the channel, kind of like a pilot, but I want to go over some popular decks and just kind of fully break them down, how to play it, deck example suggestions, just everything you need to know to really be confident in playing the deck. I generally get a lot of, "Hey Collins, how do you play this?" or "Hey Collins, could you play this for me?" So I know how to do it. So I'm just kind of getting ahead of it. The first one's going to be DeathWave. So this is a pretty popular deck. Death and Wave are the two namesakes, but we're just going to go over it and really break down how to really play this deck. So first of all, deck wave guide, right? What is death wave? How does it work? The strategy is you're going to use wave to play death or She-Hulk for cheap while also hampering the opponent's strategy. So you get to play a ton of big things for very cheap, but you also disturb what your opponent is trying to do by making their cards a little bit too expensive. So here's a standard deck list. This actually isn't like that standard, honestly, but I needed a list that, hey, we could start with. Squirrel Girl, Iceman, Yondu, Bucky Barnes, Carnage, Killmonger, Wave, Deathlock, Arrow, Doctor Doom, She-Hulk, Death. So this is just like a standard list. You can mix and match. We're going to talk about some alternatives you can put in, but this is just like an idea, a rough idea of what a deck wave deck looks like. So first piece, Wave. Core piece. This card is very important in Death Wave deck because it allows you to turn 5 play Wave, turn 6 play Death, play She-Hulk, and then also play another card optimally, right? But a lot of times you're going to play Wave, then you're going to play Death plus another card, or you're going to play She-Hulk plus another card. So it just really makes this deck work. It allows for big swings turn 6, and it's just a core piece of what you're trying to do. If you don't have this card, you can't play this deck, basically. Same thing with Death. I would say if you don't have this card, it's going to be really hard to use this deck. I wouldn't necessarily say it's like 100% unusable, but it's really tough. But this is one of the two payoffs for playing Wave on 5. You want to make Death very cheap, and then on turn 6, you can drop down the Death and other cards and really make that huge swing. Same thing for She-Hulk. This card allows you to play it for 2 mana on turn 6 if you play Wave by itself on turn 5. So that's really good because you have 6 mana cards, all your other cards costs 4, and this card costs 2. So you can play this card for 2, another card for 4, and optimally, you want to also play Death for 0. But this is a big payoff for Wave. And one of the very common combos is you go She-Hulk plus Arrow, and Arrow really locks down your opponent. Arrow being the next card we're going to talk about. This is the alternative win con, alternative lockdown win condition, where you get to just look at whatever they want to play, you move it all to one side so they can't really do exactly what they're trying to do. They can't really contest the lanes you're already winning. So you get this essentially way to really win the game. They can only really play one card under normal circumstances. So they play their one card, you move it to the side you don't care about, and you win the other 2 lanes. So this is a very powerful card, very strong, one of the alternative win conditions. Next up, we have the Destroy Engine. So this is kind of a package of cards that destroy other units in your deck or your opponent's deck that really cause death to get cheaper. So I didn't really talk about Death's ability, but Death's ability costs 1 less for each card destroyed in the game. It normally costs 9, but it costs 1 less every time you destroy a card. So when you use it with Wave, it'll cost 4, but then it'll cost 1 less every time you've destroyed a card. So it can go down to 2, it can go down to 0. So this is the destroy engine in this particular standard deck list. We have Carnage, we have Deathlock, we have Killmonger. So Carnage and Deathlock kind of do the same thing, where they just destroy all the cards in a lane, where Killmonger is kind of unique in that it destroys all 1-cost cards no matter where they are. Well, on the field, no matter what location they are. So those are the 3 primary destroy engines. There are other destroy engines that we're going to talk about, but these are the 3 I want to focus on. These are the 3 most important. And now we have the destroy targets. So these are the cards that you are looking to destroy. They either get destroyed efficiently or they destroy your opponent's cards. So they're very cheap. You can play them on 1. You can play them constantly. They fill the board for you to destroy them with the Killmonger or the Carnage Deathlock. So here we have Squirrel Girl. Squirrel Girl is really good because it puts down 3 1-drop cards for you to destroy. Bucky Barnes is just a very powerful piece. When destroyed, it comes back with 6 power. So it ends up being a 2-mana 6 power that feeds into your game plan. Yondu is really nice because it destroys one of your opponent's cards, lets you see what they're trying to play, how they're trying to maneuver into this game state, as well as being another cheap 1-cost to get destroyed. And Iceman's kind of not standard, but Iceman's a really powerful card if you can play it that can really brick what your opponent's trying to do. Hitting a 5-cost card could be game changing. Hitting a 3-cost card at the right moment, these kind of things can really delay or neutralize exactly what you want to do. So if you can put Iceman in a deck, it's a really good 1-drop to have. So definitely just put it in here and have it in my standard list, even though it's not really a standard card. All right. Now, how do we want to pilot this deck, right? How do we actually want to play out a DeathWave deck? Your goal of DeathWave deck is to get at least 2 triggers for death, but optimally 4. So the reason why we want 2 triggers is because if you play Wave after 2 triggers, your death will go from 4 down to 2, right? So since Wave makes everything cost 4, with death being only 2, you can play 2-cost and a 4-cost on turn 6 and have that big swing. Optimally, you want 4 triggers because then death goes down to 0. And now you can do something with She-Hulk. You can go 0 plus 2, since She-Hulk's going to cost 2 if you save that 2 mana. And then you can also play an extra card. So that is the big swing, the full payoff where you get to do Death, She-Hulk plus Arrow or Magneto or Doctor Doom or something of that nature. So here we have kind of a couple examples of destroyed triggers, how much they would. If you did something like Yondu and Deathwalk, Yondu would get the trigger by the battle cry, the on reveal, and then Deathlock killing the Yondu will get you 2 triggers. Squirrel Girl plus Killmonger is a very popular way of getting lots of triggers. Squirrel Girl puts out 3 1-drops. Killmonger kills all the 1-drops. You get 3 triggers right there. And something else is like Iceman Bucky, right? You'll play those in 1 lane, and then you'll Carnage that lane with both of those cards. You'll get 2 triggers, but you'll also get 12 power on that lane, right? So that's why Bucky Barnes is really powerful. You get so much tempo as well as feeding into your game plan. So that's kind of the idea. You want to get 4 triggers. So if you did something like Yondu plus Iceman plus Bucky Barnes plus Carnage, now you have the 4 triggers. Or if you do like Squirrel Girl plus Iceman or Squirrel Girl plus Bucky plus Carnage or Deathlock, now you have those 4 triggers. So, well, you need Killmonger, actually. You have to do Squirrel Girl plus Iceman plus Killmonger to get the 4 triggers. If you did Squirrel Girl plus Bucky, which now we're getting into random territory, you're not going to get the full trigger because you'll have those cards on different lanes. So you need to either play Killmonger to hit all the lanes, or you have to do something like Carnage and Deathlock to hit as many targets as possible if you want all those 4 premium triggers. So how do we pilot this deck, right? You want to play your cheap cards early. We kind of went over it in the last slide, but you just want to play all your cheap cards and you want to focus on getting that premium 4 trigger mark. It's very important, right? Especially if you have death in your hand or you know you're going to draw it. That 4 premium trigger mark allows the wave to make the death cost 0, and that's a really big deal. Wave should optimally be played on turn 5 so that you get the payoff on the last turn, right? You play once wave goes down on 5, death costs 2, your other cards cost 4. Or death costs 0, your She-Hulk costs 2, and then your other cards cost 4. So playing on 5 allows you to do your big combo, your big swing. It's also the last turn, so if you did something like wave on 3, death on 4, well then they just Shang-Chi you on 5 or something, or if you death on 5, they'll Shang-Chi you on 6. So by waiting till the last turn, they have to guess where they want to Shang-Chi, and there's a lot less room for them to counterplay your game plan. However, you have to be careful of Leech, right? Leech is kind of popular, so if you think they're running that, maybe you do want to play your death a little bit earlier so that you dodge the Leech. So there is other things to think about. You can't just brain off this deck. It is kind of a strategic deck. You have to know what you're doing, but it is a very good one when you play it correctly. So then the last spot I want to talk about is the flex spot, right? So here I have Doctor Doom in my standard deck list as a flex spot, but really this spot is going to be determined by what makes sense in the meta. So it doesn't have to be a big card, it doesn't have to be a tech card, but it's really just a card that makes a lot of sense. Here I have Doctor Doom. There's a lot of arrows running around, and people usually just assume they win if they arrow your cards. But Doctor Doom hits every lane, so even if they arrow you, you still get points in the other lanes, and that can really contest them and really throw them off guard. It's also not a common card, actually, in Death Wave. This Doctor Doom is not a common card, so you'll usually catch them off guard if you're running it. Sometimes people run like Magneto. I'd say that's more common than Doctor Doom, but I think they're not really expecting you to ignore their arrows usually. So Doctor Doom really can get those 8-cube victories. So that's why I like it. I'm a big fan of this card anyways, a little bit biased, but I do think it works well here. But it doesn't have to be Doctor Doom. There are a couple of alternatives which we will talk about, right? So when we're thinking about flex spots in that particular place, we're usually looking at big cards, right? So instead of Doctor Doom, we have Chavez. Chavez makes your draws a little bit more consistent. It means you're usually going to draw She-Hulk or Death early, and then you can just work around the cards you draw. You can have Magneto. Magneto's a big powerful card. It also moves things, so you know, okay, I'll move this there. They might not be expecting that. So that's a nice tool. 12 power is really safe. Moongirl. Moongirl's a very good option, especially if you're missing one of the alternative cards of Death or She-Hulk. Instead of running that, you can just Moongirl and then play 2 copies of Death or 2 copies of She-Hulk. So it kind of fills in the gap if you are missing those key pieces, and you can use that as kind of a alternative win con until you get the Death or the She-Hulk that you may be missing. Armin Zola, this one actually can work. You can do something like play the Death and then play Armin Zola and then get the Deaths on the other side. This can be sneaky. You can definitely catch people off guard with a play like that. So it is something to consider in the tech cards. It also sometimes gets played in Deadpool lists if you are going to play Deadpool, which we will talk about. But it is a good tool if you can get it to work. But it is a card that loses pretty heavily to Arrow. Everyone has Arrow. And that's kind of like the main issue with it right now. Just so common to see Arrow in the game. So you don't really see Armanzilla as the win con currently, but it can change. And if Arrow gets nerfed or anything like that, you could see this being more readily used. And then tech cards, this is more like Cosmos, Shang-Chi. You're already running Killmonger, but just those type of cards, Enchantress, just tech cards that can win a game by itself if used correctly. So if you think, oh, the meta right now is very heavy this deck list and this tech card destroys this deck list, well, it's way better to play the tech card instead of playing anything else, really. So you can definitely just put a tech card here if you think it makes sense to the meta, if it thinks it makes sense for your game plan. So that's another alternative you can do. Now, when we talk about destroy alternative options, these are more the early game cards that you're going to be playing or the activators that you're going to be using, right? So there's a lot of tier 1 drops that you could be using instead of the ones that we suggested earlier. Angel's one that's used but not like super popular because sometimes you'll have in your hand and you're like, I lose out on that value. I already have Iceman in, but Deadpool's one that you can be using. Deadpool is its own game plan in itself because you can just kill off the Deadpool over and over and over and over again and just get a huge statted Deadpool. Nova is another one. Nova is maybe what I should have put instead of Iceman, but Nova allows for a lot of buffs on your board, especially works well if you're going to play Deadpool because you give it that extra buff and start the scaling a little bit earlier than normal. And then the hood is another one drop that's commonly used. It gives you 2 different units, so you can kill both of them, or you can save the demon for the later stages of the match when it's relevant, usually after Killmonger. And then Venom is another destroy trigger. This one isn't as reliable, I would say, comparative to the other ones because your cards you're killing don't have that much stats. So the Venom's not really going to be giving you all that much. Usually your cards have 1 or 2 base power, the ones that you're killing. So you're not really getting that much value. If you are playing a Deadpool list, that could be different. But the current list that we do have does not really take advantage of Death's or Venom's upside. And then Wolverine is a common card. That one's perfectly fine to play. It did get buffed recently, so I would say Wolverine is a good card to play. If you want to play it now, I just kind of like the cheaper options essentially. I like having a ton of 1 drops that I can kill, even though Wolverine's really good and I think is absolutely fine to use. I do currently prefer the cheaper options in the destroy triggers comparative to Wolverine. The Wolverine is great. Wolverine is absolutely great. Now, here are some alternatives for the core cards. I will say, first of all, you need Wave and you probably need Death. They're the namesakes of the deck. Like, it's like, I hear people ask me, hey, I want to make your Patriot list, but I don't have Patriot. Well, I mean, you need that, right? It's pretty core. It's in the name of the list. So I would say Death and Wave are pretty core, though you can get away without She-Hulk or Arrow. It will be worse, in my opinion. It will feel less consistent because you're losing like a core win con. But you can do something like Moon Girl if you don't have She-Hulk or Arrow, right? Instead of using Moon Girl or She-Hulk as a trigger, you just copy the death and play 2 deaths or 2 She-Hulks or something like that. Same thing for Doctor Doom. Instead of playing She-Hulk or Arrow, you just play Doctor Doom and the death, things like that. And then Chavez for Arrow, I think is a little bit better than for She-Hulk because the Chavez will let you draw the She-Hulks and the deaths more consistently. So even though you're not really needing that Chavez to be played down on the game, you're just getting more consistent draws so that you get your early game correct and your payoff is more consistent. So those are some of the core card alternatives. I would say like if you if you can play with the core cards, you should. But I always get comments like in stream or on YouTube like, "Hey, I don't have this card. Hey, I don't have this card." These are some of the things I would think about, but just understand you are playing a slightly weaker version of the deck. And then finally, we're going to be going over some example builds here. So here I have kind of my base deck list on my account. I do have Wolverine in here, but I could easily switch that out. I could easily go here. I could put a 6-drop here, whether I want to play Magneto, whether I want to play Doctor Doom. And this is perfectly good. This is perfectly fine, right? So same thing with the 1-drops, right? I don't have to run exactly these. So this is what I want you to be thinking about, like what fits, what makes sense, what do you want to play with, right? So instead of running like the Iceman, I could say, okay, I'd rather have the Hood. And I could put that in. And this is a perfectly fine deck list. Right? Or I could say, oh, you know what? Maybe I don't want the Hood. Maybe I want something like, let me see. I want Angel. Now I'd be a little bit like, why Angel? Like personally, but you could do that, right? Instead of Angel, you could say, okay, I want to play Deadpool. And now since I have Deathpool, maybe I'll change it up. I'll take out the Doctor Doom and I'll put another Destroy trigger. I'll put the Venom in, right? This is perfectly fine. So there is a lot of options to this deck, kind of mix and match what feels right for you, right? So I'm not going to say, okay, this deck wins the most out of all the other decks, right? Because the main issue with having a deck list is if they know every card you're running, that deck is very limiting and predictable. So it's always nice to have a card that maybe they won't really expect because you can catch them off guard. That's where the Doctor Doom comes from me, right? It's not that common, so that's like how I catch people off guard. But if you're running like, oh, this, if I say something like this one deck list is the best, and then everyone copies that, well, then that deck is not the best anymore. They know exactly what you're running. They know all the pieces, and they can easily counter it. They're like, okay, he's always playing Doctor Doom here and Arrow, so let me play around that, right? So that's why giving like exact pieces is maybe not the best approach, but giving you a skeleton to work with is really where you'll catch people off guard and you'll make the magic happen. So I definitely think there's a lot of different tech choices you can do. You can say, okay, let's go Moon Girl here, right? And I'll copy the She-Hulks and the Deaths, but now I need like a lower curve, right? So I need to focus on 1-drops. So now I'll play something like I'll put Angel down, right? And I'll put Deadpool down. Get these cards out of my deck quickly. So there's a lot to work with, and overall, that's DeathWave. I hope this kind of helped. I hope if you were trying to learn about DeathWave, this really answered a lot of your questions. This is the first one for this deck breakdown that I'm going to do. So let me know if you liked it. Let me know if there's more I should add in for like future videos of this type. I was considering putting some gameplay, but it already gets long, and I don't really, and I feel like I've already explained how to maneuver the deck. But if you want gameplay, like I might make either a separate video with that, or I might like add a little bit at the end. So I'm basically asking, you know, how do you want this? Is this good, or do you want more? Do you want less? Da, 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 da. And I'll take the feedback and readjust. But overall, that's what I got for you today. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I hope you guys learned something, and I'll see you in the next one.